Hi, I'm Elise Naramore. Recall that we're here to explain the learning progression method, how it's implemented with a special focus on the logistics of grading. This is part 7, in which you will learn what a grade translation is, how it is developed, and how it is used. This is the 7th part of this video series. In previous sections, I've explained why we use the learning progression method, how it is implemented, as well as describing the 10 practices used in my physics classes. In the last video, I explained the types and quantities of feedback students receive and how to know if students are doing well without traditional grades. So now that you have a better understanding of the system overall, we can discuss how students earn a particular grade and what it means at different points during the year. A grade translation chart provides information about how the scale you use will enable students to earn a particular grade. We publish this at the very beginning of the year, but we don't really discuss it with students until we complete at least 2 full units, which is about 12 weeks of school. By that time, they have an idea how the system works, have had enough assessments to see progress, and have developed a relationship with me to trust me when I say it works. This scale can be adjusted up or down depending on the level of the course. It can also be adjusted if you are required to report grades more than twice a year. It needs to be simple and easy to communicate. Regardless, because it is different, it will require an explanation, lots of practice using it, and consistent support. Students can take control, setting goals and working on any areas of weakness. So this is the grade translation chart that I have been using for the past 5 years in my physics classes. When interpreting this chart, keep in mind that students will be earning scores in each of the practices. Let's look at a particular row in order to understand the general format and structure of this chart. In the 4th row, it says, any 5 standards at proficient level and with no standard lower than developing. This means that out of the 10 practices that I use, a student who earns at least 5 of them at proficient or better, but nothing lower than developing, so no beginnings and no not enough evidences, they can earn an A for the mid-year. At the mid-year, students have had 5 months of practice. At the end of the year, students have had 10 months of practice. Therefore, earning the same scores is more equivalent to a B+. So notice that it's easier to get a higher grade at the mid-year than it is at the end of the year. This is because you've had 5 additional months of practice by the end of the year, and therefore the criteria should be higher to get the same grade. So we're going to discuss this a lot more over the course of this module. This is the grade translation chart that I've been using in my honors physics classes. Note that the requirements are different than that of physics, as it's a more challenging class. The expectations of performance are higher. When interpreting this chart, keep in mind again that you're going to be earning scores in each of 10 practices. Let's look at a particular row in order to understand how to read this. In the 6th row, it says, any 6 standards at proficient level and with no standard lower than developing. This means that out of the 10 practices, a student who earns at least 6 of them at proficient or better, and nothing lower than developing, so no beginnings and no not enough evidences, that person will earn a B at the mid-year. At the mid-year, again, you've had 5 months of practice, but by the end of the year, you've had 10 months of practice, and therefore earning the same scores would be equivalent to a B-. Again, note that it's easier to get a higher grade at the mid-year than at the end of the year, and this is again because students have had 5 additional months of practice by the end of the year, and therefore they should have improved from mid-year. It is important to note that grades are not averaged. Again, they're not averaged. So the mid-year grade does not count. It's just a progress report saying that if you continue to improve at this rate, you will get this grade by the end of the year. This is great because if you mess up or you take a while to adjust or absorb the skills, there's no penalty. However, you can't just stop and rest on your laurels. Learning must continue throughout the whole school year, and you cannot simply maintain the status quo and expect the same result 5 months later. This was discussed in detail back in part 4. Remember, everything matters, but nothing counts. You practice because it will enable you to master the skills of the class. Why do you play GTA 4 for hours, or go to dance lessons nearly every day, or have to clock a certain amount of hours of training in order to become an EMT? Because you have to perform, and the only way to get good at it is to practice. That said, when you practice, sometimes you don't do so well, but sometimes it's super easy and you do great. Either way, there should be no effect on your grade. The key is consistent and honest feedback from both yourself and your teacher. You can't get feedback if you don't do the work. Does my grade for the year depend on the very last attempt? Well, yes, that's sort of true. It's your last test, your last lab report, and your last project. Those will be used to determine your grade. But really, no. All of the practice that you have done up to this point will matter. If you have done sufficient practice and you've been attentive to the provided feedback, then you will be successful. And you have 3 separate assignments that comprise the final attempt. It's not just like one thing. While completing the last lab report and the last project, you have access to previously completed examples and feedback, so it's not a testing situation. This is an example of the performance of one student from my honors class over the course of the year. If you look across the top, you can see that the 10 practices are listed, and then down the first column, all of the units are listed. By the end of Unit 1, this student earned 5 developing and 4 beginnings. Good start. By the end of Unit 2, this student improved in 4 skills marked green to 2 proficient, 5 developing, and 3 beginnings. By the end of Unit 3, this student improved in 2 more skills marked green to 3 proficient, 4 developing, and 1 beginning. And you can see over time there was continued improvement, but it wasn't linear. There were several times that this student regressed, look in red, but almost always regained that level by the next unit. This is the same student, but we are now going to interpret her scores using the grade translation chart. First, note that the semester ended at the end of Unit 3. So we use the third column of the grade translation chart for Units 1 through 3, and the last column for Units 4 through 7. I used the chart to assign grades in the last column with the semester change here. Notice that there's no grade assigned for Unit 1 because I didn't yet have time to teach them how to do using feedback. This means that I didn't have 10 scores, so I couldn't use the chart yet. But at Unit 2, I could. So this student would have earned a C based on her scores. By the end of Unit 3, she had brought it up to a B-. Many students and parents might be upset by grades like these, but this is a time for a conversation. What can she do to improve? What is keeping this honors student from moving to a B or better? The fact that she has any practice is still at the beginning level. Once she addresses that, she will be able to move up the ladder. That one beginning is going to keep her from moving up to higher brackets, no matter how great her other scores are. You might ask, why do we do it this way? I want my students to be well-rounded, to work on all areas without ignoring weaknesses. Besides, recall that developing means just to include relevant information, even if it's not fully fleshed out or even correct. Beginning is just trying. Should an honor student get a B simply trying? This is an example of a student from my regular physics class. Again, look across the top, you'll see the 10 practices, and down the first row, those are the units. There were 6 units, not 7 for physics. By the end of Unit 1, this student had 5 developing, 3 beginnings, and 1 not enough evidence. By the end of Unit 2, this student hadn't submitted any labs, and therefore I could not evaluate him on the first 4 practices. And you can see how easy it is to identify when a student is struggling. But by the end of Unit 3, this student had improved in 6 of the skills marked in green to 3 proficient, 4 developing, and 3 beginning. And then you can see over time there was continued improvement, of course not linear. There were several times the student regressed, you can see that in red, but almost always regained that level by the next unit. Not only that, but he really improved by the end of the year, showing amazing progress. This is the same student, but we're going to interpret his scores using the grade translation chart. First, note that the semester ended at the end of Unit 3. So we use the third column for Units 1 through 3 and the last column for Units 4 through 6. I use the chart to assign grades in the last column with the semester change here. And again, I'm going to show you how I did the grades later. Notice that there's no grade assigned for Unit 1 because again, I didn't have enough time to teach them how to do using feedback, so I didn't have 10 scores. So I couldn't use the chart. But at Unit 2, I could, and this student earned an F if I was assigning grades, due to the not enough evidence. By the end of Unit 3, he had brought it up to a C, with absolutely no penalty for the previous unit's performance. Many students and parents might be upset by grades like these, but this again is a time for conversation. What can he do to improve? What is keeping the student from moving to a B or better? I remember that we had a great discussion about what he needed to do to shift from the beginning level to developing level. Since there's no lasting or cumulative effect, he was free to just do better during the next unit. In each row, I've highlighted the scores that limit the student's grade. Look at the grade translation chart. It's always going to be the lowest score that determines the bracket of grades that a student can earn. Because we are so used to traditional grading and understand it thoroughly, we have this misconception that it's the most objective method of grading, and that is just a myth. Let's set aside the fact that research shows evaluative feedback shuts down growth in students. Points grading is so subjective. Why? Well, because this teacher makes up the point values, decides how many points to assign or take off for a particular problem or even for part of a problem. From personal experience, when a group of students did particularly badly on a problem or question and it tanked their grades, I simply changed the points value. So they seemed to do better, but did that provide them or me with accurate information about their skills? And did they care as long as they got a good grade? Using this method of grading, I can provide students with honest feedback on their actual achievements without worrying about the effect on their grades. At the same time, I can use the results of a particular assessment to determine if the class or individual is ready to move on to the next level without making any significant changes to my overall plans. This method has enabled us to stick within the limits of the traditional system as required by our district, while still avoiding the pitfalls of evaluative feedback. It is easy to adapt to a wide range of student needs and course objectives, and this reduces stress for everyone involved. We will go through some more examples in Module 9 after we discuss target levels.